Hello my dear gardening friends. Today in this video we are going to focus on a very basic skill which every gardener should have if they want to run their gardens successfully. Watering. And for some of us who garden for some time, watering can be a second nature. We don't even think about it. It comes to us naturally. But for people who are new to gardens, who want to learn how to make their own gardens, watering for them can be this unknown and very complicated science. So in this video we are talking about watering our gardens. That would be the first part of the video, and the second part of the video would be dedicated to watering plants in pots. So experienced gardeners, if you want to skip this video, you're welcome to do so, but if you want to hang out with me in my garden, you're welcome to do so as well. I have 7 tips for beginner gardener how to water their gardens. The tip number 1 would be, we always want to water in the morning. And why is that? The morning hours are cool hours of the day before the sun and heat hits our plants, and our plants need that moisture to face those tough conditions of the day. And also there is a thing that in the morning when we water our plants, and if we happen to water the foliage, that foliage will have time to dry before the night, because when you send foliage of plants wet into the night, all sorts of conditions can develop, all sorts of diseases can develop, especially on our beautiful roses. So morning time is the best time to water our garden. And you know, for me, watering in the morning is a wonderful thing I do. I get up, usually I'm the second one to get up. My husband goes to work very early. I get up before kids and I go outside into the garden. And if it's a nice breezy day, I walk around my plants, I check on them, I water them, I make sure that they're ready for the day, and then I start my day. And that's a lovely thing to do, to combine watering your plants with pleasure. Tip number 2. Not too little, not too much. And some gardeners, for them, this is can be so confusing. And I have a wonderful test which you can do always when you are not sure if the soil is dry or wet. You do a finger test. And some gardeners approached me and they said, oh gosh, how do we know if the soil is dry or wet if we stick our finger inside? How does that work? And you know what I say? All of us are doing laundry. And sometimes we are reaching out to check if laundry is done or not. So right away our hands feel, our skin feels the presence of moisture. So the same will happen to you if you stick your finger into the soil and you feel it. And don't do just the surface touch. Go maybe 1 inch into the soil and feel the soil. And you would be able to detect moisture if it is there. Here I have a watering can, 6 gallons of water it holds. And this watering can will be used on 1 bush. I'm trying not to water the foliage. That's another thing about the beginner gardeners. They take their sprinkler, they water all the garden, making sure that the foliage of the plants is wet and the top level of soil is wet, and they don't look underneath what's happening 1 inch under. And very often, if they do this, you know, the sprinkler motion in the garden, making sure that they wet the foliage and garden looks very watered, it's not the case. So I advise you always to do your finger test and test it. In case of these roses, I'm going to do another bucket, water them, and they will receive a good amount of water for next 2-3 days. It is important to water deep and not often. When we water our plants not deep, let's say the top level of the soil is wet and further soil, the soil underneath is not, the roots of the plant, their job is to search for moisture and nutrients. And they cannot collect nutrients without moisture, so they will focus, all the roots of the plant will focus where water is, which is the top level of the soil. And when the drought condition hits, our roots are not deep enough to search for deep waters because they're not there. But if we water deeply And not frequently, we force our plants to be more equipped to face drought conditions, to search deeply down for water, and if there is sun and dryness coming in and we are not there to water our plants, which can happen in our garden, they are ready to face it with no problems. Tip number 3, we don't want to water foliage. Foliage is tricky. It's connected to morning watering. We don't want foliage to get wet going into night, especially on our beautiful roses. Roses can develop black spot, and where I garden in Zone 7, Connecticut, 6-7. Black spot is a plague. So in no way I want to water my roses at night, and I don't want to water my roses foliage, because I don't want my beautiful roses develop black spot. So the same applies to all other plants in the garden, unless you're fighting spider mites in your plants. In that situation, you want to have wet conditions, because spider mites don't like those conditions. Tip number 4. Please don't forget plants which are tough in your garden. They do need watering from once in a while. For example, yews in my garden are tough plants which are not really showing the signs of drought very often, but they do need watering and fertilization. For example, this guy, he's growing at the side of my front entrance, and he's growing on this narrow strip between the parking lot and on our steps. And you know what? I would forget to water him. And this year he was showing signs of drought. He had some of dead stems. So now I know that I just can't rely on him being tough all the time, and I water him and I fertilized him this spring, because tough plants do give up and they do get dead and they refuse to thrive in the gardens. Tip number 5. Water slowly if water runs off. In this area of my garden I have hostas, and because this soil here is slightly elevated, when I water my hostas, the water has a tendency to run off on our sidewalk. So what I do with this area, to avoid the runoff, I water my hostas slightly, and that light watering softens the soil and make it more ready to accept more water. And then I come back in several minutes and I give it a nice deep soak. This way there is no runoff, you don't lose water, you make sure that your plants are watered and that water is not wasted. Tip number 6 brings us to this side of our garden where we have water barrel. And water barrel is a nice way to save water. As we know, water is a precious thing, and we try to save water and to reuse this as much as possible. So in state of Connecticut we have this water barrel program where the water company gives the consumers, here we have the New Englander water barrel. So the water company sells these water barrels for reduced rates to the gardeners who wants to save water. So the rain comes here from the roof, it gets collected in this water barrel, and through years my beautiful yew kind of grew around this area and kind of hid the water barrel away from the site. And we use this water to water our front vegetable beds, raised vegetable beds, and I find it very convenient. So for the beginner gardener you can look into that program, or you can find the ways how to collect rainwater and reuse it in your garden. Tip number 7. Be in your garden every day. Observe your plants. And with that everyday observation, you would be able to understand plants so much better, and you would be able to understand watering needs of plants so much better. Now we are moving into a second part of our videos, 4 helpful tips how to water your plants in pots. And tip number 1 would be watering schedule. I just received a message from Miruna from Netherlands, and she is ready to buy her first rose and take care after that rose in the pot on the balcony. And she's really concerned how she should take care after the flower, after that plant, how often and how much she needs to water it, how much during the hot days of the summer and how much in winter. So this video would be for her. How to take care after plants in pots. 4 rules. Rules number 1, schedule time. Believe me, nobody will tell you what would be the best schedule time to do your pots. It all depends on pot size. It all depends on pot's soil medium. Some potting soil mediums hold water much longer. It depends what type of pot you use. Maybe it's a smart pot, which saves water and then feeds plant. But if you, let's say, if you want to raise your plants in average size, average pots, you must understand that watering should be every day, especially if you have your rows on the balcony. The water evaporation is much faster in the pots, and our plants depend on us in the pots for nutrients and for water. So watering, preferably in the morning, is a must, and maybe in the evening. If we have hot weather over 90 degrees during the day, chances are that that soil is going to be dry in the pot in the evening, and our plants would be going into the night in dry soil, which we don't want to do. Tip number 2, we have to mind what type of soil we are using in our pots and what pots we are using. You would be surprised how many stores sell pots for gardeners without the bottom holes. And I'm amazed why those holes are not there. Well, the good thing is we can drill our own holes if pots are not ceramic, but make sure that if you're ready to garden with pots and you're a beginner gardener, make sure that you're buying pots with holes. And why is that? In case we overwater our plants, water has a chance to escape and run out. It's a good idea to use a saucer also under our pots. Make sure that plants are not sitting in deep saucer. If you want to water your plants very well, when you water them and water collected in the saucer, you can leave it there for half an hour and then take the water out, because you don't want the bottom roots of the plant to sit in water. That half an hour is needed in case the soil didn't absorb all the water. It can do so from the saucer back into the pot. As for the soil type, never use garden soil in pots because it is too heavy and it can drain water inadequately. And the 3 beautiful features of the potting soils which we buy from the gardening center is they retain moisture very well, which our plants need in pots. They retain nutrients very well. They drain very well because we don't want to have waterlogged conditions. And majority of plants love well-draining soil. A good advice would be not to fill the soil to the level of the pot. This way you can water your rose or your plant and water is not going to run out of the pot right away. And then we have suggestion, tip number 4, watering schedule for winter and for summer. In winter, the evaporation doesn't happen so quickly as in summer, where we need to attend to our potted plants every single day. But in winter, in case of Miruna, who is going to overwinter her rose on the balcony, I just checked the planting zone of Netherlands, and it's zone 8, which is pretty warm. Her rose doesn't need to go into the sheltered condition, and Miruna probably just need to water her rose once a week, once every 2 weeks, to make sure that roots are hydrated, the water is not evaporating, and her rose is doing fine. One more suggestion I forgot. In case Miruna is trying to choose the pot, and I want her to keep in mind that dark pots, and usually our plants come from the nursery in dark containers, they do attract sun. They do not reflect sun, they attract sun. So what Miruna can do, especially because she's going to have her pot on the balcony, what I would advise her to do, to plant her rose into light colored container, because light colors reflect sun. Or if she doesn't want to do that, she can just buy a light colored container and put her rose in a dark container inside that light colored container. This way there would be an air pocket in between 2 pots, and it would be another way to protect rose against strong summer rays. In her message, Miruna really wanted to know how much water she needs to put into the pot. And again, nobody would be able to tell you, Miruna, how much. You have to do the test yourself. You have to slowly, what you can do, you can slowly put water into the pot till the point where the water starts coming out from underneath. And then you note how much water that rose takes. And if you want to go that way, that you have pre-measured water to give your rose, you can do that. But you have to do that test yourself. I'm sure that very soon, after several weeks of taking care of this rose, that watering habit will come to you naturally. And you wouldn't think how much water you need to give to your rose. You will just know. You will be a true gardener, knowing how to water without even thinking about it. I wish Miruna all the best luck with growing her rose in the pot. And to all of you, my dear gardeners, happy gardening. See you next time.